Now, as you heard earlier, Dusty's talk title today is God's Will. So the reading that goes with it today is from Ernest Holmes about God's will. And he writes, "Our divine inheritance is self-sufficiency, perfection, peace, wholeness, and must include abundance, self-expression, accomplishment, and happiness. The nature of God is wholeness. The nature of wholeness is happiness. The nature of happiness is peace. The nature of peace is harmony. And the nature of harmony is joy. So whichever way we turn the proposition, we are compelled to understand the nature of reality. The nature of God is perfect. Therefore, the will of God, which can never be divorced from God's nature, must always be a will toward our wholeness, peace, poise, power, and self-expression." And so it is.
Hi, few people have arrived in the sanctuary. Welcome, welcome. The theme for the month of March is You Are Rooted in the Divine, and my talk title today is God's Will. Now, I think most of you know that I'm kind of a little bit of a word geek. I like to look up words and know the different meanings of them, and are always interested in how they can just mean so many different things. So there are many different definitions for this word will. For many of us, the first one that may come to mind might be that legal declaration of how a person desires for his or her possessions to be disposed of after death, that a will is a legally executed document of that declaration. But will can also mean purposefulness or determination, as in an athlete who has the will to win. It can mean to decide on or to intend, as in the project will be completed when they will it. It can mean self-control or self-discipline, as in she lacks the will to overcome her addictions. It can mean to induce or try to induce through sheer force, as in they willed the sun to come out. It could mean to put into action or a deliberate intention of something, as in do as you will. Or it could mean the desire or purpose or determination of someone, most specifically someone that is in power, as it is the sovereign's will to spare the prisoner. Now, here at the Triangle Center for Spiritual Living, we believe that we arrived on the planet with free will. The definition of free will is the ability to choose to think or to act voluntarily, that we can do, really what we want to when we want to. For many philosophers, to believe in this idea of free will means to believe that human beings are the authors of their actions. And they would then reject the idea that human actions are determined by external circumstances or by faith. The idea of free will, however, it's not always easy. It's not always as easy as we would like it to be. My guess is that many of us here have at some time or another in our lives asked ourselves the question, what should I do? What should I do today? What should I do this week? What should I do this month? What should I do this year? What should I do over the course of my lifetime? Now, this question could be applied to many of the difficult decisions that we might have to make during our lives, such as, where should I go to college? Should I accept the marriage proposal of my lifelong partner? Should I move to take a new job to a city where I don't know anyone? The question can also be applied to many more common, not less stressful kinds of questions, like, what should I do with my really overbearing boss? What should I do to support my friend in her time of grief? What should I do about that crazy neighbor of mine that lives next door? Now, the little choices might not seem as monumentous. They might not seem as important, but the truth is that the little choices that we make every day have an accumulative effect that far outweighs the significance of the big choices that we might occasionally have to make. I imagine that if we were all to look back on our lives and to look at all of the decisions or all of the choices that we had made, we probably become aware that there were many times in which we discerned quite well, and we made choices that enhanced our lives. We might also be aware of those times in which the choices weren't always so good. Times in which we chose from somewhere other than our highest and best selves. We might also be aware of the times in which we made no choice, times in which we ignored the opportunity of making a choice, times in which we unconsciously made the choice not to make a choice, which was actually making a choice to allow the outer circumstances of our lives to direct the trajectory of it, right? James Martin, in an article called Decision Making by Heart, says decision making is not only about shoulds, it also concerns our heartfelt wants, our deepest desires, our holy longings. If we are self-reflective people, we ask ourselves other questions as well. Who do I want to become? What do I want to do with my life? Who is God calling me to be? Now, all of these are, in my mind, really important questions. So if will is our mental faculty by which we consciously and deliberately choose upon a course of action in every situation, in every arena of our lives, then how do we choose wisely? So today we're exploring the idea of my will, the idea of God's will, and the idea of one will. My will. Now, my will is not changing. There we go. My will is the will of our conditioned past, and it consists of all of the experiences and all of the circumstances that we have ever held up until this point. It has a personal agenda. My will has a personal agenda, and it is propelled by the beliefs that I have about myself, about everyone else, and about the world. My will has an agenda, and it's propelled by the old stories that we have told ourselves and by the race consciousness ideas that we have bought into. My will has a personal agenda and is propelled by old habit patterns, patterns that may show up as automatic or unconscious reactions in response to the world in order just to survive. It also includes anything unhealed within us. My will is often the will that rejects what is. It is a movement of thought that demands something other than what is out here in front of us to be happening. It is a will that demands that something more, something better, something different to be happening in order for me to be happy. It is a will that sometimes brings up lots of tension in our bodies. God's will. Who has, there's probably very few people who have not heard of God's will. And yet, how many of us really understand what that is? God's will is a question that is as old as time, and the answers are as varied as the beliefs of the people who gave the answers. I believe that if we asked 100 different people the question, what is God's will, we would end up with 100 different answers. Ernest Holmes says, to the scientific mind, the will of God is manifest in the immutable laws of the universe. To the overzealous religionist, the will of God appears to come through some special revelation, giving birth to a certain spiritual system of thought forever after is to be taken dogmatically and accepted without question, a truth and faith once and for all delivered. Many of us have had the experience in our own lives of a challenge. Many of us have had the experience of witnessing someone that we know, someone that we love going through a challenge. Perhaps it was the death of a loved one, or the loss of a job, or a serious diagnosis, or a fire that burned down the house, or a marriage that is in shambles. How often have we heard ourselves or someone else say in that moment, wanting to give their condolences, that it was God's will? That they spoke that platitude with an underlying belief that we do not always know what God does, but that we must be more than willing to accept God's will. Well, I do not believe that God punishes people. I do not believe that God doles out hard lessons for us to move through, trials and tribulations that we have to overcome. That would be so against the nature of God that we believe in here at the Triangle Center for Spiritual Living. So against the nature of God. What I do know, however, is that what we believe in strongly tends to become the experience of our life. So if this is what we believe about the nature of God, if this is what we believe about the will of God, then trials and tribulations will show up in our experience according to our beliefs. If we believe that God's will is towards unhappiness and limitation, then it follows that we shall experience unhappiness and limitation as a result of our beliefs. Not because it is God's will, but because of our beliefs. For me, the will of God must be consistent with the nature of God. If it is true, and I believe that it is, that the nature of God is joy, peace, love, freedom, wholeness, power, self-expression, abundance, then it must be so that the will of God is also joy, peace, love, wholeness, wisdom, power, abundance, and self-expression. It has to be that way. It could be no other way. God's will is the will of the heart. It's not somewhere out there demanding that we do this or that. It comes from the very deepest place within us, from the center of our being, from the spark of the divine within. Still small voice within us that is seeking to be expressed. I believe that the nature of God, and therefore the will of God, is always freedom and never bondage. I believe that it is always for us and never against us. Ernest Holmes says we must patiently, persistently, and insistently show people that the will of God cannot be toward anything other than that which is good. That the will of God and the nature of God are identical and must forever remain so, that there is nothing in the universe which opposes their good except the misuse of the law, which of itself is good. This law must present itself to each individual according to his or her belief. One will. I had something up here. I think it's disappeared. One will. One will. It was a quarter. Anyway, oh, there it is. It's a lucky quarter. I just found it. It really works good when you lay them out beforehand. So one will. This speaks to the idea that while we might talk about God's will, while we might talk about my will, that there are not two wills. There's not two separate things going on here. Reverend Elizabeth Rowley suggests that we think about a quarter, that we use a quarter to understand this. And she would say that as we look at this quarter and we think about this quarter, that it's a coin with heads on the one side and tails on the other side. That there is no separation. It's not two coins. It's just one coin, but two sides, two different sides of the same coin. So for a minute, I would like for you to imagine that the head side of the quarter is our God self, God's will. Now, God's will for us is always for a freer, fuller, more expressed, more expansive, higher expression or version of our small self. It leads to a life of wholeness, a life of prosperity, a life that is joy-filled, a life that is passionate, a life that is free. The other side of the quarter, the tails side, just imagine that this is the human experience. It represents every experience, every circumstance that we have ever had. Every experience that has molded and shaped us to who we are today. Every experience that has brought us to this exact moment. It represents the movement of thought in response to the world. It represents our beliefs that we hold to be true, the stories that we have told ourselves about ourselves and about each other. It represents our old habit patterns. Now, if we make our choices based on those past experiences, on our conditioned will, if you will, then we, in all probability, are going to experience life as though it were Groundhog Day, as though we were living our past again and again and again. When we make our choices based on old patterns or on old outdated beliefs that no longer serve us, we will in all probability find ourselves bound, not as free as we were when we arrived on the planet. Sometimes the quarters, when you look at them, appear to be a little beat up, a little worse for wear. They're kind of tarnished and scratched and maybe even dented. Our lives, we could look a little like that too. But the truth is that that external look is not who we are. It is not the truth of our being. Underneath the conditioning and underneath the dirt and the grime of the journey is our truest, most authentic self, that self with a capital S, that self that we can never be without, that self that can never be separated from us. Reverend Elizabeth Raleigh says, when we make choices based on the present moment, in the now, and from the essence of our highest self or God's self, we are in alignment with and operating from God's will. God's will and God's nature are identical, and God's will and my truest will are the same. Therefore, there is only one will. Now, I know that we all love the practical side of our spiritual path. So what can we do to know God's will? How can we align our will with God's will? How can we find that one will, which is the intersection between God's will and our truest and highest will for ourselves, or the will of our heart? Now, if we want to do this, the invitation is to do 5 things. Know God, be transformed, give thanks, know ourselves, and do good. Know God. The invitation is to not just know about God, to not just have an intellectual understanding about God, but to actually experience God's presence, to practice God's presence in our everyday lives, to meditate on God, to contemplate about God, to see, recognize, and acknowledge God's presence in everything and in everyone, and in every situation. When we do this, that still small voice of God is present. It is present to inform and to clarify. It is present to gently nudge each of us in a way that we can understand who we have come here to be. When we actually know God, we have more wisdom, we have greater discernment, and we have an expanded clarity about who we are and what we are to do. Be transformed. It is said that God's will for us is not so much about what we are to do, but who we are becoming. The invitation is to do the inner work to release any old patterns, any old beliefs, any old stories that are no longer serving us, anything that is in resistance to our becoming our highest and best self. The Bible says, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." Give thanks. It is said that we are to rejoice and to give thanks for all of our experiences, for all of our circumstances. To be able to see beyond the veil of our perceptions, to know that God is everywhere at all times, or God is nowhere. To be willing to turn away from the world of form and to find the presence of God within everything and within everyone, in all of our experiences, in all of our circumstances, in all of the situations, in all of the arenas of our lives, and once we find it, to give thanks. Thanks for that presence in our life. Know ourselves. We all have strengths and weaknesses. So the invitation is to really begin to know what those are, to really begin to know ourselves. What am I good at? What makes me come alive? What are the deepest desires of my heart? What is seeking to be expressed through and as me? It is said that the place that God calls us to is the place where our deepest gladness meets the world's hunger. It's beautiful, yes? The place God calls us to is the place where our deepest gladness meets the world's hunger. Find out what that is for you, and then go out and be it. And then go out and do it. Do good. Who we are is a divine emanation of God. We are God's ambassadors on the planet. We are here to bring that presence. We are here to bring that love, that joy, that creativity, that peace, that abundance, that wisdom. We have all received a gift of life, and it is our responsibility to use it to bring good to the world. Now, that good doesn't have to be something grandiose. It doesn't have to be something that we deem as like uber significant. It just has to be something that we are in that moment. Something that we have a huge yes for in our hearts. From the bottom of our hearts, that yes just flows. Something that we are willing to bring to the world in each and every moment of each and every day in our own unique way. Now, the unofficial tagline for my message this morning is, "Thy will be done." Now, basically, this phrase, "Thy will be done," represents a type of surrender, a surrender to a higher power, a surrender to a higher power, a power that is higher than our conditioned mind, a power that is higher than our conditioned will. The conditioned mind is a limited mind, but when we surrender to the greater mind, we really open ourselves to the allness of possibility. Thy will is always going to be something bigger or better than we could ever imagine for ourselves. The original Aramaic in the original Aramaic language, "Thy will be done," translates as, "Let your heart's desire unite heaven and earth through our sacred union." Let your heart's desire unite heaven and earth through our sacred union. What could be more beautiful? What could be more wonderful than that? Please repeat after me. Today I say yes to the deepest, most authentic will which rests in the heart of me. Today I say yes to the deepest, most authentic will which rests in the heart of me. And so it is. And so it is. Please turn within. How good it is to pause, to turn within and remember to remember that which is back of everything that there is, seen and unseen. That one life, that one love, that one heart, that one mind, that one creative energy. I call this power and presence God, and I know that it is who and what I am at my very core. Created by it, out of it. That golden thread runs through me, connects me to life and to everyone else and everything else. Now I know that this can't just be my truth, that it has to be true all of the time, so I absolutely know that it is true for each and every person sitting here this morning, that each of us is a unique and divine expression of the divine, here on purpose, with a purpose. And it is from that deep and abiding unity that I speak this word of prayer about and for each of us, individually and collectively this morning, truly knowing that we are spiritual beings having a human incarnation, that we arrived on the planet with free will, that we can choose, that we have choice in all matters. And I claim for us that there is ease and grace around the choosing, that we recognize that we have within us all that we need to make good, well-informed, well-discerned choices from the heart of who we are, from the self with a capital S. And that all of the choices that we make from that space are absolutely right and perfect for us. I know that there is ease and grace around connecting with God's will, around finding that intersection between God's will and that will that is in the deepest part of me. And that each of us powerfully brings forward who it is that we are to be in our own unique way, in a very powerful and amazing and brilliant way, a way that forever changes life as we know it. That together we can create a world that works for everyone. And I'm so grateful to know this truth and to speak these words. So grateful for the power of prayer, knowing that these words are loosed into a law that only ever says yes. That they are clothed even in form as I am speaking them. And so I speak them and I release them with love and gratitude, letting God be God. And I invite each of us to anchor this prayer for ourselves and for each other simply by saying, "And so it is." Amen. Amen.